People who quit without notice. What straw broke the camel's back? Dillard's. They told me to clock out and work all night because Regional was coming to inspect the store. So they wanted me to work for 8 hours moving around heavy stuff for free. Quit on the spot. Told me I wasn't a team player. I asked the manager if he would pay me for not working. He said no. I asked him why would I work without getting paid. Blank stare. I got hired by Dillard's, but they kept pushing back my start date by weeks because the store owner was on vacation, and with my budget I really need to stay working. They make a huge deal of starting you off a little above min wage and promising frequent raises and easy commissions. Talked to a friend who worked there before, and it sounded like they only start you off above min wage, so they can give you a pay cut as soon as you miss a quota. I ended up starting another job while I was waiting for them. Old sales job I had, landed, closed a big deal with a nice commission check heading my way. Found out a week or so later that the client wasn't mine. Therefore, the check would be going to the correct sales rep. The correct sales rep just happened to be related to the boss, and so they got a free commission check without ever lifting a finger. I worked in telesales when I was 16, just a job for the summer. The company was selling marketing space in magazines for small construction companies, and my salary was commission-based. I decided to work smart, not hard, and approached a few bigger companies. After a few days, I was in contact with one of the biggest construction companies in my country and was closing a deal for a 2-page ad. My boss was happy, but told me that the deal was so big that one of the full-time employees would bring the deal home. They literally just made the last confirmation call and sent over the papers and took the commission. My dad had cancer stage 4 lymphoma. We couldn't have our phones on the floor unless we filled out some paperwork with HR for emergencies. Asked my supervisor for the paperwork, and he said, "Don't worry about it." Well, when his boss visited, he saw my phone and asked me about it, so I told the truth. My supervisor was pissed. A couple of weeks later, I get called into the HR office. My sister called to tell me my dad died. Supervisor wasn't there, but I left early. I took my bereavement and came back to work. My work bestie pulled me aside to tell me supervisor accused me of lying about my dad having cancer and dying to the entire team while I was gone. I hugged her and just left. I once worked as a landscaper, and during a slow month, some of us workers were asked to head to the boss's brother's property and help out there, which was fine. My boss asked that I pick him up in the morning and take him out there. The straw that broke the camel's back was while out there I had filled some buckets with water, and while I did turn the tap off, it was slowly dripping. My boss noticed this and had a complete meltdown. He made threats to harm to the person who left it dripping. I dropped my tools, told my boss to shove his threats, and left, leaving my boss in the middle of nowhere. Did everything they wanted. Jumped on a plane to another site on 1 day's notice. Ended up working 16 days straight before coming back. Took a WFH customer service job role I didn't really want just to help out on a temporary basis. We were told that half the team could have Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off, and the other half could have Christmas Day and Boxing Day. Except me, who could only have Christmas Day. I signed out of the VPN, blocked my managers, put my laptop in a box and posted it to head office with my resignation letter inside it. When I got called an hour before my shift and was told to come in immediately because the manager didn't schedule enough people. When I reminded her I needed a bus, I was told to just take a cab. Stupidly, I did. And when I got in, she told me I should have made sure she did the schedule right. Then I was told I'd be opening the next morning, even though I was closing the kitchen that night. I closed. I did not open. My apron and key were on the counter waiting for her when she went to work in the morning. My dad died right before Christmas. I was already scheduled for a week off for family travel. HR said I could add 3 more days for funeral services so we could have it after the holiday. I came back and received a call from HR. The woman apologized and said she needed to ask but would make it brief. She asked if my dad actually died. I told her yes, and she apologized again and said she didn't need anything else. Then the office manager called me into her office to tell me my boss had been telling people she thought I was faking it to get more time off. My boss was horrible in general and relied on me to do the majority of her work, which is what led her to creating the story about my dad not actually dying. She was hoping I'd be called back early from my trip. I had been interviewing for a job at another company and got an offer the day I got back. I called from my desk and accepted the offer, then packed my things and left. I was working at Sears part-time for Christmas. They never trained me. When my supervisor came in for something and found out I was working alone, He ran out before they could ask him to help. My other supervisor had a nervous breakdown, and while crying, said he wanted to punch the manager but was a felon and needed the job. I just got tired of that because I was literally just working for Christmas money. They found me at my other job and asked me to come back because I had figured out how to do the job without being trained. I said no, and they told me I'd never be able to work for Sears or Kmart again. I was a shift lead in a kitchen where none of the management knew anything about BOH. I ran grill, sauté, expo, and oven solo during every peak shift. I ordered trucks, prepped all week for weekend brunch, wrote kitchen schedules, contacted vendors for repairs, and generally ran the kitchens day to day. I was given the keys and started opening 6 days a week. I was working 55+ hours and loving it. I expanded our brunch service to Fridays as well as Saturday, Sunday, and I come up with an early week menu to use up leftover brunch items and minimize waste. I helped grow weekly sales from 45K to 75-80K in 3 years. I started having issues with closing management on shifts where I wasn't there. I'd get in at 6 a.m. to open, and the restaurant was left a mess and prep stocking wasn't completed. I talked to the staff and tried to get them to help out, but I had no support and follow-through from the actual managers. This went on for weeks. Then one week I was in at 5 for Friday brunch prep. I was prepping sheets of bacon and went to the back to pull the biscuits I had prepped the day before. I had left them on a speed rack. I found them on a shelf stacked on top of each other. The weight of the trays had smashed every biscuit into single sheets of dough on the lower trays. The speed rack had the dressings and cold items from the line close the night before. I did about 90% of the brunch prep by the time the opening manager showed up at 8:30. We opened at 9. I told her what was left to set up the line. She asked why I was telling her. I laid the sheets of dough in front of her, dropped my keys on top, and walked out. I got nearly 50 calls from them that day and dozens of texts. I didn't respond to a single one. A few days later, the owner of the store called me and asked who he needed to fire to bring me back. I told him I'd pass and ended up finding another job in a day. A little over a year later, this restaurant shut down and was demolished to turn the space into a parking garage. Heard my boss talking about my mom, who did not work for the company, on the phone to HR while at work. She said my mom was a nut job and went on to lie about how she had plans to replace me for the last few weeks. She was deeply paranoid. Earlier that week, she'd gotten wind that I was looking for a second job closer to home, which caused us to have a long talk where I kept having to reassure her I had no plans to quit. But just her assuming I would quit had made her turn on me like that after 6 years of working together, including multiple major work events, like COVID. So somehow she went from begging me not to leave to the next day telling HR she had plans to fire me for weeks. But it was what she said about my mom during that same call that broke the camel's back. My mom was in deep grieving at the time, having found her boyfriend dead on the floor on her birthday, and I had confided in my boss that I was spending a lot of energy trying to help my mom and that it was causing me stress. As soon as I heard her say that, I packed up my desk, walked over to HR and told them everything I'd heard, and quit when they said they didn't have any other positions open elsewhere in the company, and said they wouldn't take action against my boss.